Hi, everyone. Thanks, Anne-Marie. Thank you, Anna, for that lovely introduction. What an absolute pleasure it is to meet you all. I want to first begin by saying it is really an honour to be here and join this lovely community. I hope for those of you who aren't Australian, my accent is okay. I work on trying to not be too Australian when I speak. So I do also get very excited. I'm Greek Australian, so the Greek combined with my Australian, which means that my communication goes up about 20 times, especially when I get nervous, and I'm a little nervous. So so I look forward. It's Friday night here. It is what it's 8:15, and so I'll get into it. So I'm going to share a screen to share with you. So I hope you can all see that. Yep, that's okay. Everyone can see that. Anne-Marie's okay? Okay, so yeah, so look, before I begin, I want to do something that we do in Australia, and that is acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which we're situated. This is a map of Australia pre-colonisation that showed the vast number of nations, Aboriginal nations that existed here. And it's an important part of Australian culture now, where we recognise, especially at a university like the university I just worked at, which was Western Sydney University, which is situated on the banks of the Parramatta River, which is a very important meeting place traditionally and historically for the First Nations people. And that's so I'm on what is known as Gadigal land, and the people from the Eora Nation. So I just want to begin by acknowledging that. A little about me. I actually started my life as a banker. I worked in finance for about 10 years before I left finance, but I was the first member of my family to go to university. And this is a photo of, this is actually, I worked this out, this was actually the year I went to university. And this is me, the guy in the red shirt, in 1986. That was my first year. Yeah, that's not a boy band. It's actually a group of my friends. Someone's telling me that that's a mullet, but my argument is that that's just a reflection of the flash behind me. So it's not really a mullet, but this was me in 1986. First member of my family to go to university. I had no idea what to expect at university. In my first class, my first day, my mum packed me a big dish of lamb to take to meet people, and I used it as a way to make friends. So after I worked for about 10 years in finance, I actually left finance to work for a number of human rights and environmental based organisations. I did a lot of human rights work throughout the Pacific and Asia, including working in places such as Papua New Guinea and Bougainville, where I was part of some peace and reconciliation missions, including helping rebuild the financial infrastructure. I then entered academia, and this is me on my graduation day, getting my PhD. I used to say it was the happiest day of my life, but one day my wife was in the audience when I was giving a keynote, and she made a point of reminding me that the wedding should be a happier day. So this was the second happiest day of my life. And as Anna mentioned, I'm now leaving academia after about 20 years to pursue the Australian, to work for Fulbright, which is about cultural exchange, having done quite a lot of research in the United States, including spending a year at the University of Wyoming, where I researched political partisanship and the future of the Republican Party. So I learned a lot about I taught there as well, so I learned a lot about the education system and where things can go right and where things can go wrong. So this is, I'll get into it now, but before I begin, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge the people in this room, or in this virtual room, I should say. I did spend some time reading some of the papers that have been published previously, and I just think there is so much knowledge here, and I'm really humbled to be starting off this wonderful gathering. There is so much knowledge here for us to share, and so I'm really humbled to be part of it. So I want to acknowledge each of you and the wonderful work that you're doing, and I'm looking forward to some of the discussions. So let's talk about the on-campus experience, and I think I joined universities. I got my first full-time position as a tenured position in I think it was 2006, 2006. I started working, and from the moment I started working in universities, so that was 15 years ago, there was lots of conversations about how the on-campus experience was basically about to end. That universities were going through these massive levels of disruption, that the higher education sector was going to be undermined by, new entrants. There was, at the time, not long after I started, there was the introduction of MOOCs, massive open online courses, and this was going to bring about the end of on-campus experiences. And universities in Australia started having conversations about, do we need campuses? Should we be closing campuses? Should we be just only like teaching online? What's the future? And so the on-campus experience really did start, people started questioning the value of the on-campus experience. But, one of the things that we do know is that, coming to a higher education institution, and I know that we all have different terminology around the world, so I'm just going to talk about I'll use Australia's terminology, which we always talk about universities and the higher education sector. So coming to a university, we really want students, what we know from research is that students are really looking for two dimensions, and we as educators very much want to have two dimensions. The first dimension is, of course, the knowledge. We want our engineers to build bridges and know how to build planes that we fly in, and me as a sociologist want to be able to talk about gender and class politics and all these really important dimensions of how societies interact and all that. But just as important of that is the socialization processes that happen, the processes whereby we bring people together to understand, to discuss, to debate, to question, to challenge each other. And this is where I think, the discussion of where I think the discussion of technology disrupting and removing the on-campus experience has really failed or misunderstood the desire for our students to embrace that. And my argument is that when we bring students on campus, we need to offer two opportunities. The first is to create a safe space where our students can discuss complex topics and can share safely the ideas that they want to share. But my argument is we also need to create brave spaces where we have the educational power of discomfort, where we can challenge our students to be challenged. We want them to have the words and the ideas to be able to not only understand what we want to, to understand the sort of the educational component, the knowledge component, but to be able to take that and apply it to the real world, to understand how they can discuss and debate. Architects, for example, the architecture students, for example, in our university, need to understand that they need to wrestle not only with what may be a beautiful piece of design, but how do you manage hundreds of stakeholders with different perspectives? I can talk about race theory or gender, and I can talk about critical whiteness and all those things, and they're important. But how do I empower my students to have a conversation at home when their relatives or their friends, in a conversation they have in bars, or how do they confront sexist talk or all those things that they're going to confront in everyday life. And I think there is that's the second dimension that we often do not embrace. So I think we need we have this idea of the educator, and then we also need to have this idea of creating safe embrace spaces where we can bring our students together to challenge each other, to discuss and debate, to challenge us. And that's, I think, really, really important, that we also need to accept the fact that if we do our jobs correctly, then we will be challenged, and we need to be able to communicate. And the way that we respond to those challenges, I think, is very powerful in setting the scene for what we expect from our student cohort. So, so as I said, education disruption, education technology has always been part of disruption, and you don't have to look far on Google to find hundreds of reports by consultants, KPMG, Deloitte, all of them are releasing these reports talking about how universities are under siege, and that's actually a report that was released here in Australia a few years ago called "Universities Under Siege," and how technology was really gonna displace the on-campus experience, and particularly the large classroom. That these large classrooms are no longer had pedagogical relevance, and technology was going to allow us to all come together. And amongst that, we talked about how, we presented this idealized version of students, people, I remember colleagues of mine saying, like some of the administrators at the university saying things like, a student doesn't even have to leave their bedroom to come to your lecture or to listen, to get the knowledge that they need. They can sit there like it's this idealized version of us, just a student sitting back and taking in all this information, and somehow this is a learning process by just sitting there and taking it all in. But what we've learned through COVID is people do not want to learn through that. I mean, we were forced to teach like that through COVID, and even long before COVID, the research that I had undertaken, and I want to acknowledge that a colleague of mine from Deakin University, Trina Duror St. Duror, who we reached out to students and did quite an in-depth survey of students, and the research hasn't been published yet, but what we found, and this was before COVID, that students really did want that face-to-face experience. They wanted the option sometimes to be able to draw material online, but they wanted that to be a choice. They didn't want that to be their only option. And now, obviously, some people enroll online and have this distance learning mode and so on. But the vast majority of the students that we spoke to said that they wanted this online experience. And learning by just sitting there in the bedroom and taking things in is not really learning. It's not that, doesn't have that same sort of engaged process. There are advantages of it. There are ways that we can take advantage of it, but it doesn't replace the pedagogy of sitting in a class and discussing things. And I honestly believe that. Now, as I said, COVID and all the research in Australia from our students has confirmed that one of the things that COVID has really confirmed is that students want interaction. They want face-to-face, they want to engage, and this has become more obvious than ever. So there is a power in bringing students together, and I will argue that there is a specific power of bringing students together in a large classroom. So what does this mean? Well, again, over the last 15, 20 years, I've noticed lots of buzzwords that have been thrown around about replacing large lectures with all sorts of things. We've had blended learning, we've had flipped learning, we now have this horrible term called PHELC, which people throw around. All these terms are thrown around. And, and one of the things that really disturbs me as an educator is that, technology is often seen to lead pedagogy. Well, my argument is always pedagogy should lead technology. Now, and this goes, I suppose, just sort of echoing what I said before, that doesn't dismiss online, that does not dismiss online learning processes. In fact, incredibly valuable, but you can't do what, I've read that, that universities in Australia at one point were arguing that, they were setting goals like, 50% of all content should be online, like that 50% is some magical tool. We can't do that. What we need is to know what we want to teach and to be able to teach it in a way. And sometimes that can be online, and then sometimes that can be in small classes and a flipped classroom. But there's also an incredible power in bringing students together in a large classroom. And I think it's when we do that, there is a unique opportunity for us to take advantage of. And I want to briefly talk about how I take advantage of it just to close out this presentation. So I'll talk about, the many strategies that I employ. I just want to limit it to 3 to just sort of give examples about how I do that. And I think that'll take me to my 20 minutes. And I'm looking at you. If I'm going too long, just give me the signal. Okay. So the first is to actually take advantage of our large classes. That is, there is something special about bringing people together and experiencing an educational moment. It's one of the, there's a really, Roland Barthes, a philosopher, talked about and writer talked about the pleasure of watching movies with a bunch of strangers in the dark. And, just like VCRs and Netflix was supposed to end experiences in movie theaters, there is something about experiencing something in a group of people, with a group of people. And this is a photo of me where I run, actually I do dancing and body percussion, and I use it to explain chaos theory and how it shapes how we can apply chaos theory to understanding certain social phenomenon. And I'm not going to get everybody to do body percussion here. If we were all in Valencia together, maybe I would. It's a good way to get people started in the morning, in the morning, or even a good way to end the day. But what it is you bring people together to actually have a sort of a physical experience. That it's actually a physical experience. It's not just an educational experience. It's so much. And I think that brings it out. So I want to give you an example, a specific example, which again won't quite work online, but I want to sort of explain about one of the things that I do, and I want to talk about how I actually do an exercise which I might just get you to quickly participate in, and we'll to give you an example of how it works. So one of the things I teach is I do a lot of work on racism and anti-racism. And so one of the things that I try and confront is unconscious bias and stereotyping. So one of the ways I do this, and you can imagine, I've got a class of about between say 400 to 500 students all sitting in classes together. And I begin by asking them to do this exercise. And I might, if you've got pen handy, I might just ask you to quickly participate in the exercise, if that's okay with everyone. And we'll just quickly fly through it. So what I want everyone to do is on a piece of paper, just quickly write your full name. Now, underneath that, write your cultural background. So for me, I would write Greek Australian, others write Australian. I will let people there write what they see their appropriate cultural background is. I'll just give you a moment to do that. Now what I want you to do I'll give you 30 seconds to do this. I want you to write down 5 quick stereotypes about your cultural background. They don't have to be true about you. I just want you to write down 5 quick stereotypes. So, all Australians are surfies, or, all Greeks in Australia were said to have owned fruit shops. We're said to have married our cousins. We're said not to shower when I was growing up. They're the kind of stereotypes that we confronted. And so, in my class, you got to imagine, in the classes I teach, out of Greater Western Sydney, we have lots of young Muslim men and women, lots of people from rich cultural diversity, and so they'll write things like all Muslims are terrorists, or they'll write things like all Muslims are misogynists and things like that. So I'll write these stereotypes. And then what I get them to do is I get them to like circle which ones, if any, are true about themselves. So I'll just give you a quick tick the box. Okay, now I want you to imagine a class of about 400 people. What I then say to my students is I get everyone to stand up, and I say to them, all right, I want you to sit down. So you can imagine 400 students all standing up, and I say to them, I want you to sit down if none of those are true, if none of the stereotypes that you wrote down are true about you. And I will say they're invariably something like 60 to 70% of the students will sit down immediately, that the stereotypes do not apply to them at all. There is something, and then I say, sit down if only one stereotype applies to you, if only 2 stereotypes apply to you. By the time I get to 2 stereotypes, usually there's only about literally like 5% of the students are left standing. And I usually stop about there, not to get into detail, but one of the reasons I do that is that it gives them a visual and a physical experience of the fact that these stereotypes, which we often use and form our own unconscious biases, if they're not true about us, how can they be true about others? And this is a physical manifestation of confronting stereotypes and so on. And this is a really important. So this is one example of the many types of examples I use. So my first point is that when you bring people together, take advantage of those numbers to do things that really bring out the experience. I have seen an academic I worked with at another university who taught chemistry, and she would give students symbols at the beginning of the year, and she would say, okay, all you H's create water, and so they would have to find they'd have to find O's and create H2O and so on. So and then by the end of the semester they were doing basically they were forming the human genome from all the atoms. And am I running out of time?
1 minute, David.
Okay. Cool. Okay. The second thing is that we should think about the way that we interact with our students. So an hour is a unit of time. It's not some predetermined lecture. So the way, this is going back to 1992, actually, that this is the attention span that students have. It usually lasts about 10 to 12 minutes. And right at the end, you can see that little dip up. And that's usually when you say something along the lines of, in the exam, you will need to know, and everybody pays attention. So my argument is that in a large classroom, there is something you need to do about bringing the students consistently and engaging, giving them constant exercise, bringing up their concentration levels, bringing it up. And again, a number of allowing them to use that group about coming together and really interacting. And during the questions, maybe I can answer specific questions about how we do that. And the third thing is to actually, embrace the whole idea. I'm really driven by Paulo Freire's perspectives of pedagogy of the oppressed, that students have as much to teach us as they have, as we have to teach them. And I'll finish by saying that, when I was teaching gender and gender politics, I asked my students to write me a story, not an essay, a story, like an experience. And one of the experiences I asked them to write me was specifically to talk to the boys, and I had a different exercise for the women in the class. I said, all right, I want you to write me when you had what you did as you were growing up to prove that you were a real man. What did you have to do? And this one young man wrote me a story and shared it with me, which then I get permission to share with the rest of the class, which is when he was 8 years old, he played rugby league with a broken arm to prove to his father that he was a real man, right? And this is an experience that I could never experience. That was not my experience growing up. And for young men in my class to hear that and to hear him say, that is an experience when I become a father I never want my children to experience, is incredibly powerful. So it's creating that opportunity. So just to conclude, David Hornsby, who is the other keynote speaker, and I have worked on the last decade or so to build this concept of the citizen scholar. The idea that education is not only about scholarship, but about creating engaged, empowered, and citizens who want to change the world and understand their obligation. And we've identified these different dimensions of the citizen scholar, and this work that we've been doing together over the last 2 decades, or the last decade and a half, has really been about arguing the fact that within large classes there is a unique opportunity to see these things through, and for students to learn from each other, to learn from us, and us to learn from them. So I'll leave it at that. I'll say thank you, and I look forward to hearing other papers. Thanks.